Tonight on KQED Newsroom, the West Coast is ablaze. Fires in California, Washington, and Oregon force hundreds of thousands from their homes. We talk with founding members of a brand new wildfire research center in San Jose who are addressing critical gaps in our fire knowledge. And when a vaccine for COVID-19 comes out, will it be safe to take? We talk with two scientists working on the coronavirus response about the unprecedented process to inoculate billions of people around the globe. Welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Priya David Clements. Wildfire smoke, fog, and wind came together this week to produce eerie, end-of-the-world looking landscapes. Autumn traditionally kicks off California's peak fire season, but a historic number of fires have already blazed through the state. More than 3 million acres have burned in 2020, surpassing the previous record set in 2018. Nearly 15,000 firefighters are battling 28 major blazes across the state that have also claimed at least 12 lives. But amid the destruction comes opportunity guided by science. San Jose State University has just inaugurated a new wildfire research center, the largest one of its kind in the nation. The scientists span a range of disciplines, from meteorology to ecology to social science. They're pioneering new tools and techniques to better study, predict, and adapt to living with wildfires. Joining me now by Skype from San Jose is Craig Clements, the director of the Wildfire Interdisciplinary Research Center and a professor of meteorology at San Jose State University. Also joining us by Skype from San Jose is Amanda Stasiewicz, an assistant professor of wildfire management at the center. Hello to you both.
Hello.
Hi.
Craig, let's start with you. Many of us looked at the skies this week and thought things like, we're on Mars, it's the end times, or even Blade Runner. What did you think as a fire meteorologist who has a much more nuanced view of what's going on when you looked at those orange skies? And not just in terms of the weather, but in terms of our new wildfire normal here in California.
The first thing I thought was that's a lot of smoke. I think most people in Northern California, and particularly in the Bay Area, had not seen this much smoke ever. And so that is pretty scary and daunting to maybe think that this could be the future of our next summer and the summer after, that we can expect all this smoke. So yeah, it was pretty apocalyptic.
That's the word that seems like it was used over and over again this past week. This new center is your brainchild, and you created it because you saw really specific and critical needs in our knowledge for wildfire information. What are some of the unknowns that you're hoping to answer?
Well, with this team of interdisciplinary scientists across the fields of wildfire, we hope to better understand fire behavior, particularly extreme fire behavior, how changing fire weather conditions can lead to severe fires, and what policies and what social aspects that we can adapt to and make modifications to the way we're living in these environments. So there's a lot of different aspects that we want to tackle with the center. For example, we really want to get high resolution modeling for fire weather forecasting and fire behavior forecasting using new observational tools and computing resources. So it's pretty exciting in terms of the science that we hope to conduct.
I want to get to some of those tools in a moment, but let's bring Amanda in here. Amanda, you're a social scientist, and you basically study human interaction and wildfire. What are some of the areas that you are particularly eager to dive into in this new center?
Hi, yeah, I'm particularly eager to look at how California is adapting to fire in different places. So within each of these big fire scars are going to be little individual communities with their own histories, cultures, and capacities. And I think that we need to find ways, we need to learn from their stories and find ways to help them better adapt to their situations in the future.
There has been a national cohesive wildfire management strategy that was put into place in 2014 by the Obama administration. And under that, there were 3 prongs. So one is to make the landscape more resilient. Another is to improve our response to wildfire. And the third is really where you work. It is in the adaptation of our communities to wildfire. What sort of adaptations are working best?
So there are a number of adaptations you can take, and some of the best ones you can do for protecting private property in your home is reducing flammable vegetation around your house. People are starting to install sprinklers around communities to decrease the ability of fires to start inside their communities. There are basically a lot of things through this program called FireWise communities that basically outline a bunch of things you can do as an individual or as a community to address fire risk.
And while you're saying there's a lot that we're starting to do, there's obviously a long way to go. Would you be able to say in kind of a percentage term, how much have we done? How far do we still have to go?
That's a really challenging question because as Craig is telling us and we're seeing, right, is that the fire circumstances are changing over time. They're becoming more extreme. So the tools we have right now for adapting to fire are, what we learned from previous fire seasons. So as we move forward, every community that is adapting right now has to continue to adapt into the future as we continue to have our situations change.
Craig, one of the areas at your center at San Jose State University that you're pioneering is this understanding of fire weather. What is fire weather, and how can our understanding of it help prevent the devastation we've seen over the past several years?
Well, fire weather is simply defined as hot, dry, windy weather, which is very common in California in the summer and fall. But what's happening is it's getting warmer and it's getting drier, and so that's affecting the fuels, which are the things that are burning, the trees, the shrubs, and the grasses. And so as that continues, the drying and the warming, the fires get more intense. And so when they get more intense, the fires can start creating their own weather. And so we don't have a good handle on how those processes work. How do the fires get so big? How do they create firestorms and generate thunderstorms, or what we call pyrocumulonimbus clouds? So understanding those requires new technologies such as monitoring. These systems are not monitored very well. So we've pioneered the use of mobile assets like radars and lidars to better observe these phenomena. With that, we can then model it with state-of-the-science, what we call coupled fire atmosphere models that take into consideration all these processes, so we can better understand and predict these types of extreme fire behaviors that we expect in the coming decades.
So there could be sort of that fire warning, like there's a tsunami warning, which would help people evacuate and get out even sooner than they are now.
Well, we pretty much kind of have that with the red flag warning, which is being revamped by the National Weather Service currently. And so that does work, but it's kind of like a warning. It's not like an evacuation. We don't do evacuations until we have an ignition and that we know the conditions are going to be requiring evacuation of communities. So I think better understanding the conditions in the future will allow us to better handle the societal impacts that we can expect as well.
Amanda, since 2009, there's really been a strategy of evacuation first, and we're seeing that in Oregon now, where we've got 500,000 people who are being evacuated because they're in danger of a fire. How well is the evacuation strategy working out? Do people willingly leave their homes?
Yeah, no, there's a lot of research looking at evacuation queues. A lot of people want to be informed, they want an official evacuation order. And what we saw with the Camp Fire, and we're seeing with a lot of these fires that are fast moving, is that those orders don't come sometimes in time for people to leave and have a safe evacuation without either meeting a fire or getting into an accident. So we need to start thinking also about what happens when we can't evacuate. So things like repairing our homes or community areas to be able to shelter in place safely. How do we decrease the risk around our homes? Maybe we need to have firefighting equipment on site. So there are other approaches that can help us deal with this, but evacuation is still the safest option. If you can get out early, that's the best way to go.
Craig, can the technology that you're using at the center help predict and prevent wildfires? Let's talk about some of those new tools.
Well, some of the modeling tools can help predict it and make the predictions more accurate, let's say. But preventing, no. I mean, prevention, it has to do with really society. It's like 9 out of 10 fires are caused by humans. So whether it's a power grid failure or a campfire, that's human caused. So those could be preventable. So the forecasting tools aren't really used for the human aspect. They're really used to understand the behavior of the phenomena of fire in the landscape. And so as those tools get better, we'll be able to better understand how fast the fires are going to be moving in certain conditions.
What can we as residents do to adapt to living with fires, Craig?
Well, like Amanda has pointed out, being fire wise, addressing the community's safety, and managing the landscape around communities. So that's why we've brought this interdisciplinary team together. So we have experts like Amanda to help us derive policies that could help communities in the future.
And Amanda, could you talk to us a little bit about how you see policy change needing to happen? What do state and federal officials really need to change in order for us to have a better future?
I think that the way that we're going to end up addressing a lot of our fire issues in the future is cooperation and collaboration. So I like to think of fire like a watershed. Fires move across landscapes. They don't really adhere to parcel boundaries or what's national forest, what's private land. I think we need to be enabling partnerships for reducing fire risk across private and public interfaces. And there's been a lot of good work there, but there's also a lot of good room to move forward.
Craig, what gives you hope about living with this new landscape in the future and in fighting fires in the future?
Well, I think there's going to be a lot of improvements in technology for fire suppression. For example, using drones or what we call UAS to map fires more accurately to potentially enhance fire suppression activities. And so I think technology is only going to help. We've seen a big increase in situational awareness with the wildfire alert camera system. So now we can see plume dynamics and some fire behavior aspects. And with the new modeling tools and satellite products, we're going to be able to monitor the phenomena much better than we have in the past. So I think in the future, that's really going to play a big role in not only the research community, but also for just communities in general, or the public, to be able to have that situational awareness themselves.
And Amanda, what about for you? I mean, these fires are burning more intensely each year. What gives you hope?
What gives me hope is that communities and people are really resilient and societies can adapt. And there are ways that a lot of communities are having success stories moving forward. And I think that we are well equipped to deal with these issues. There's a lot of existing science and knowledge out there. And I think that a lot of people are going to be increasingly interested in using it, and that we do have ways to progress forward.
And you'd also mentioned in a conversation we had earlier that fire can be a healing force. Could you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, so one of the big things we're seeing in California with our fires right now is that we have 100 years of fire exclusion from really good fire suppression. We have largely excluded indigenous cultural burning. So there's room now for putting good fire back on the landscape. Fire is this healing force that a lot of ecosystems in California need to survive. And I think that that's something that we can do definitely moving forward outside of fire season, having more prescribed fire on the ground.
Professor Craig Clements and Professor Amanda Stasiewicz, both from San Jose State University. Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
To learn how best to prepare for a wildfire and what to include in an evacuation supply kit, visit readyforwildfire.org. There are roughly 170 COVID-19 vaccine candidates being developed around the globe right now, according to the World Health Organization. There has been talk of a vaccine coming out as early as October, and President Trump's Operation Warp Speed is aiming to create and distribute 300 million doses starting in January 2021. This week, a prominent trial with pharmaceutical company AstraZeneca was put on hold after a person in their vaccine trial became ill. A vaccine is needed for a full economic recovery. But will people be willing to take a vaccine when concerns abound that it is being rushed out for political gain before the November presidential election? And who gets access to a vaccine if it's found to be safe and effective. Joining me now by Skype from Palo Alto is Dr. Yvonne Maldonado, a professor of pediatrics and an infectious disease epidemiologist at Stanford University. And joining by Skype from San Francisco is Dr. Peter Chin Hong, a professor of medicine and an infectious disease specialist at University of California, San Francisco. Thank you both for joining us. Yvonne, you've worked in vaccine development for 2 decades. Would you describe to us the work that you and your colleagues are going to be doing with COVID-19 vaccine trials at Stanford?
Yes, thank you. Currently, we are planned to start 2 vaccine trials. One, the Janssen vaccine in mid-September, and the Novavax vaccine in mid-October, and perhaps a 3rd vaccine candidate in mid-November. Again, that's all assuming that things go smoothly and continue to go well. But currently, we're scheduled to begin enrolling several hundred patients.
And Peter, you've been working in COVID-19 response through treating patients and also testing out therapies like convalescent plasma and remdesivir. I'd like to get to the science of some of these vaccines. How are these candidates expected to work?
Well, Priya, they essentially work by training the immune system to recognize the foreign microbe, whether this is a vaccine, virus in this case, but we can also train them to recognize bacteria. We train this army, and then they go and zoom off and stop that pathogen before they set up shop in our body.
And Yvonne, how difficult are these trials to do with your experience of having done this for several decades?
Well, different vaccine trials, every single one is different. It depends on the interest of the population and who you're aiming them at. I primarily do trials in children. Obviously, at this time, the U.S., really the emphasis is going to be on adults, especially adults over 65. I imagine it's not going to be hard to identify people who want to be in the trial. The key is going to be to find enough diversity in the people who are enrolled to make sure we represent all of the people in the U.S., especially those at risk.
Yvonne, there was news this week that AstraZeneca has paused its phase 3 trial after a participant became sick with neurological symptoms. I'm curious about the protocols of testing on humans and the process of vaccine development. Could you walk us through that?
Well, it's most vaccine trials will include a what's called the Data Safety Monitoring Board, or DSMB. And that is it's an independent group of people who monitor the vaccine process, especially the statistical monitoring to make sure that the data are statistically powered to make a definitive conclusion about whether a vaccine works or not. But the main issue always with any vaccine product, or any product for that matter, is safety. You want to guarantee that there is safety involved, and that is really the DSMB's top job, is to make sure that safety is primary aim of any trial that's being done.
So is it surprising that someone fell ill, or is that par for the course?
Well, you're enrolling thousands and thousands of patients here. So just given the background of events that may happen to anybody, if you pick a random sample of people, it's not surprising that there was an effect. In fact, there are almost always some adverse events. And that's what the other reason that you have a placebo group is to really make sure not just that the person who gets the vaccine versus the placebo had a better response to prevention of the disease, but also primarily to make sure that the safety signals are the same in both groups.
Peter, 9 CEOs of leading drug companies took an unusual pledge and said that they would make sure that they put safety before speed in conducting COVID-19 trials. Why was it necessary for them to come forward with such a pledge?
Well, Priya, it was pretty unprecedented that a CEO of a vaccine company would go out and tell people that they won't release the vaccine unless there's safety data or enough data regarding efficacy. We don't usually have companies reassuring the public in that way, but this season is a little bit different for several reasons. First of all, there's been a long legacy right now in COVID times of the FDA given emergency use authorization before there is data. So it's not that, this is coming out of nowhere. And regarding vaccines, there was recently a CDC guidance to public health authorities in various states saying that we should prepare our infrastructure to support a vaccine by the end of October, or specifically by November 1st, 2 days before the national election. So I think people are just afraid of premature release of a product before it's ready.
Yvonne, will you be comfortable taking the vaccine when it comes out first?
I would be comfortable taking a vaccine that I think is safe and effective, absolutely.
Now, what does that mean? Does that mean you're going to take it when it comes out, or does that mean you think you're going to wait a while and watch?
I'm not going to walk into a manhole cover, right? I mean, I want to know what I'm getting first, and that is the key, and you'll hear about this later, but we need transparency about data. That's what I want to see. If we get the data and I feel like the data's out there and it looks good, then I will get a vaccine.
Peter, what about you? Will you take the vaccine when it first comes out?
I share Yvonne's feelings, and again, if it's transparent and I can see the data, I would be out there sticking my arm out.
But you know, this is tough for people because both of you have a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge, and you can read all of the data, understand what it means. But for the average person, when the vaccine comes out, they're not going to have those resources. So what do you advise people to do when a vaccine comes out? Do you advise people to go ahead and take it? I think adoption is really a question here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think CDC is really focused on making sure that they engage communities, especially communities of color. And many of us, of course, belong to national societies and international societies where I just got off a call from an international society. And one of the issues we're talking about is how do we gain confidence? And we have to be confident first before we can convince our constituents, our populations. And so that's why we want to see the data. We want to make sure that we agree with whatever comes from the federal government. And then we will help disseminate that information. All of our organizations will do that.
Peter, I want to talk with you a little further about this international aspect. There was alarm recently when Russia registered a vaccine without having done the underlying trials. Talk us through the global arms race aspect of finding a vaccine for COVID-19.
So the vaccine has huge political implications, not just locally, but globally as well. I think of it as the new arms race. It's really China versus, the US/UK, Europe versus Russia. And I think there are a lot of alarm bells that went off when Russia approved by Russian law Sputnik 5, their version of the vaccine, without the necessary sequential steps of phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. They did publish something in the Lancet last week, but again, already a few scientists have questioned those findings in a letter that's been circulating.
Yvonne, Trump's Operation Warp Speed says it has a timeline for January 2021 of beginning to release vaccines. And I'm wondering if you find that to be a realistic timeline.
I think early 2021 is potentially possible. It really depends, again, on what the data looks like from the existing trials. They're enrolling pretty fast. I know that AstraZeneca, before this halt happened, before the stop happened, had been enrolling very quickly, and all the other vaccine trials are moving along pretty quickly. So if you can get 2 doses of vaccine into enough people and follow them for at least 2 to 3 months, to see what the safety and the effectiveness might be, then I think you can get to somewhere in early 2021, maybe mid 2021. But that's assuming everything goes really, really smoothly and you get great outcome data.
And it sounds like you're definitely saying not before the November election.
I really doubt it.
Yeah. Yvonne, in Trump's Operation Warp Speed, there's an emphasis on reaching people of color, particularly because they've been hardest hit by the virus. How well are they doing at reaching that goal?
Well, I think the emphasis has really been at the government level, trying to engage communities and key stakeholders. But there's a bit of a disconnect between what Operation Warp Speed is doing and what the industry is actually doing. So obviously they're working together, but the industry runs their own trials. And in the end, it's really up to each individual site that's enrolling patients to make sure that they can find patients of color and convince them to be enrolled. And that's really going to be critical. They're not there yet, and they need to do a better job, but they know that they're not there yet. So the question is, can they really get to the point where they're enrolling enough people of color and diverse populations and other people at risk as well?
Peter, when it comes to Black and Latino communities who have been hit disproportionately by the pandemic, how likely is it that some of these inequities are going to play out when it comes to distribution of the vaccine as well?
Well, Priya, I think it's going to be a big player. Not only are there issues in access, insurance, access to a primary care physician, to a center that is distributing these vaccines, but also there's been centuries of mistrust because of early experiences with, clinical research. I was on the radio the other day, and an African-American man called in and said, there's no way he's going to get the vaccine or give his family the vaccine because of Tuskegee. And I think that really hit home to me, that idea that, we have a lot to undo before we reach particular communities of color.
Yvonne, even if a safe and effective vaccine is soon developed, does that mean the virus is going to go away? Will it still remain with us?
Well, we don't really know the answer to that question, but I think judging from what we know about the current coronaviruses, and there are 7 human coronaviruses, 4 of which cause normal colds and have been around with us for a long time, I can tell you that those viruses return and reinfect people over and over again. So there is some evidence of immunity, but it doesn't last very long. So the question will be whether these vaccines will be able to produce not only high-level immunity, but durable immunity. And even if the immunity lasts a few months, perhaps you could get revaccinated every year or 2 years, like you do with the flu. And then the final issue then is whether or not the vaccines will prevent an individual from getting sick, but not from getting infected, so that the person might be able to be healthy, but they could actually transmit the disease to others. So we'll need to learn a lot about that once the vaccine trials are up and running and we get more data.
Peter, the Bay Area has really been taking a leading role when it comes to developing a vaccine, and much of this is because of our history as an epicenter of activism and innovation in treating HIV and AIDS. Could you talk us through the position that the Bay Area has right now in being a leader in this way?
That's a great question, Priya. I think even from the early days of AIDS and HIV, we've built up this infrastructure of not only taking care of our most vulnerable patients at all time and having an open door policy, but by creating the infrastructure to support clinical research around investigational drugs. And as you pointed out, providing the activism to make sure that the people who need it the most will get it. So it came as no surprise that with vaccine studies that we were well situated to study these as well, using that infrastructure.
Dr. Peter Chin Hong with UCSF and Dr. Yvonne Maldonado with Stanford University, thank you both so much for joining us. You can find more of our coverage at kqed.org/kqed-newsroom. I'm Priya David Clements. You can reach me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Priya D. Clements. From all of us here at KQED, thanks for watching. Good night.